Be Me Elaine, 22. Just graduated with honors. My degree is in gender studies, the culmination of 4 years of intense intellectual labor, deconstructing power structures and unpacking societal narratives. My cap and gown feel like armor. I'm not just a graduate. I'm an agent of change, ready to be unleashed upon a world that desperately needs my guidance. The graduation ceremony itself was a bit of a blur. Lots of speeches about our future and making a difference. I felt a sort of serene detachment from it all. They were speaking about abstract concepts. I was living the reality. My parents were in the audience, beaming. They took about 1,000 photos. They don't fully grasp the nuances of post-structuralist feminist theory, but they're proud. That's what matters, I suppose. My older brother, Dylan, was there too. He had to take a half day off from his job. He's a technician, something with HVAC systems. He fixes air conditioners and heaters. He stood out in the crowd of academics and proud parents, looking solid and practical. He even smelled faintly of metal and something clean, like machine oil. He hugged me after the ceremony, a quick, firm pat on the back. Said he was proud of me. I could tell he didn't get it. For him, success is a tangible thing, a fixed furnace, a happy client. My success is on a different plane entirely. It's conceptual, systemic. Later that evening, the family went out to a nice steakhouse to celebrate, a choice I found deeply ironic, a temple of red meat and patriarchal business dinners. I ordered the salmon. My father raised a glass and made a toast to me, the first person in our family not just to finish college, but to pursue a postgraduate level field of study. Everyone clapped. Dylan raised his water glass. The conversation turned to my future, as I knew it would. This was my stage. My dad asked what my first move was going to be. I took a delicate sip of my wine and laid out my vision. I wasn't just looking for a job. I was seeking a position, a role where I could leverage my specialized knowledge to implement real, structural change within a major corporation. I talked about Chief Diversity Officer roles, heading up DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion departments, or becoming a corporate ethics consultant. I explained that companies are finally waking up to the fact that they need people like me to navigate the complexities of the modern social landscape. My parents nodded along, looking impressed. I casually mentioned that the starting salaries for these kinds of positions are easily in the 6-figure range. My father nearly choked on his bread roll. I glanced over at Dylan. He was methodically cutting his steak, his focus entirely on his plate. This was a classic manifestation of toxic masculinity, the inability to engage with complex emotional or social topics, retreating into a simple physical task. I decided to engage him directly, for his own benefit. I told him that while his work is important in its own way, fixing tangible things, my work would be to fix the intangible things, the broken systems, the invisible biases that hold people back. I explained slowly and clearly that a company's hostile internal culture can be just as damaging as a broken heating system in the winter. In fact, more so. He chewed, swallowed, and then looked at me. He didn't look enlightened. He just looked blank. He said it sounded complicated. I laughed. It is complicated, I told him. That's why it requires a specialized degree. It's not something you can just learn from a manual. I felt a surge of confidence. The whole dinner was a perfect microcosm of society. Me, the forward-thinking intellectual, trying to educate the well-meaning but ultimately limited laborer. He finally finished his steak, wiped his mouth, and looked at me again. He just said, "Well, I hope you find what you're looking for, Elaine." Then he asked my dad about some issue with the car. The conversation moved on. I sat back, a little frustrated by his inability to grasp the importance of the moment, but overall satisfied. My journey was beginning. The world was about to see the value of a mind trained in critical theory. The next Monday morning, I was ready for battle. I set up a command center in my childhood bedroom, laptop, coffee, and a curated playlist of empowering female artists. I wasn't going to shotgun my resume out to the world like some desperate business major. My approach would be surgical. I targeted only the largest, most influential companies, the ones that made public statements about social justice and corporate responsibility. I was offering them a chance to put their money where their mouth was, to hire a real expert. My resume was, if I may say so, a work of art. It didn't just list my education, it showcased my intellectual lineage. Key skills included intersectional praxis, hegemonic structure analysis, and discourse deconstruction. My senior thesis, The Corporate Ceiling as a Function of Patriarchal Semiotics, was listed prominently. I drafted a cover letter that was both a challenge and an invitation. It spoke of paradigm shifts and the moral imperative of modern corporations. I sent out the first batch of applications to 5, maybe 6 of the top companies in the country. Then I sat back and waited for the flood of responses. I expected my inbox to start pinging within a day or two. A week went by. Nothing. Just the usual spam and newsletters. I figured the hiring process at that level must be slow. They probably had to convene a whole committee to process an applicant of my caliber. I decided to expand my search slightly. I included some mid-level, up-and-coming tech firms, the ones with beanbag chairs and kombucha on tap. Surely their supposedly progressive culture would make them eager to hire me. I sent out another 10 applications. By the end of the month, the only replies I had received were automated emails. Thank you for your interest in our company. While your qualifications are impressive, we have decided to move forward with other candidates whose experience more closely matches our needs at this time. It was infuriating. What experience could possibly be more relevant than my entire degree? I ranted about it to my friends from my program. They understood. They were facing the same thing. It was clear evidence of the very systems we studied. The HR algorithms were probably coded by men, designed to filter out the language of critical theory and favor buzzwords from business school. It was disheartening, but also validating. My struggle was proof that my work was necessary. Sometime in what must have been July, Dylan called me. He never calls just to chat. It's usually for a specific reason. He sounded cheerful. He told me his company had landed a huge municipal contract to retrofit a bunch of city buildings with new, energy-efficient systems. He'd been leading the proposal team on the technical side. As a result, he was getting a promotion to a senior project manager position and a very substantial bonus. He mentioned he was finally going to buy that new truck he'd been wanting for a year. I tried to sound enthusiastic for him. I said, "Congratulations," and "That's amazing." But as I hung up the phone, a bitter taste filled my mouth. Dylan, promoted, getting a bonus for what? For knowing how pipes fit together. Meanwhile, I, an expert in the very fabric of social reality, was being ignored. The injustice was staggering. Capitalism, in its infinite blindness, was rewarding manual skill over intellectual acuity. I posted a long, scathing critique on my social media about how society fetishizes hard work, in a physical sense, while devaluing the emotional and intellectual labor that truly drives progress. It got a lot of likes from my academic circle. It made me feel a little better. My dad saw the post. He later asked me gently if maybe I should be less aggressive in my approach. I had to explain to him that my tone wasn't aggression, it was righteous indignation. Around that time, I finally got a breakthrough, an email. It was from a massive, old-school financial firm, one of those glass and steel monoliths downtown. They wanted to schedule a video interview for a role in their corporate social responsibility department, Vindication. It was happening. I spent the next 3 days preparing. I reread Foucault. I polished my talking points on stakeholder capitalism versus shareholder supremacy. I dressed in a sharp professional blazer. I set up my laptop with a neutral, academic-looking bookshelf behind me. The interview was with a woman who must have been a senior vice president. She had sharp eyes and a no-nonsense haircut. I was ready for a high-level intellectual discussion. Her first question: "Can you walk me through your experience managing a budget of over $50,000? I was a bit thrown. I explained that my experience wasn't in direct fiscal management, but in the theoretical underpinning of ethical resource allocation. She just stared at me. So, no budget management experience. She moved on. Describe a time you developed a multi-stage project, defined key performance indicators, and presented the results to leadership. KPIs? I tried to pivot. I told her that in the realm of social justice, success isn't always quantifiable through traditional metrics. It's about shifting culture, which is a long-term, qualitative process. I used the word paradigm 3 times. She cut me off. So, no project management experience. The rest of the interview was a disaster. Every question she asked was about concrete, practical skills. Skills I found, frankly, pedestrian, event planning, volunteer coordination, data analysis, grant writing. I tried to explain that my degree gave me the framework to direct others in these tasks, that my value was in high-level strategy. The look on her face was one of profound disinterest. The interview ended in under 15 minutes. She said they were looking for someone with more hands-on experience. I was shaking with rage afterward. This woman, a supposed leader, was a perfect example of a patriarchal enabler, so indoctrinated into the corporate machine that she couldn't recognize true innovation. She didn't want a thinker. She wanted a functionary, a cog. A week later, I had an interview with a trendy tech startup, the kind that has a chief vibe officer. This, I thought, would be different. The interview was with 2 guys in their late 20s, wearing hoodies with the company logo. They were really excited about my degree. They said it was super interesting. They asked me what I thought about their company's latest statement on social equity. I gave them a detailed 10-minute critique of its linguistic shortcomings and performative nature. They looked a bit stunned. Then one of them asked, Cool. So, are you good at, planning office parties? We need someone to organize our Pride Month celebration and our charity bake sale." I felt a cold wave of horror. They saw my degree, my entire intellectual foundation, as a qualification for being a party planner. They wanted me to bake cupcakes for charity. I think I mumbled something and ended the call. My confidence, for the first time, began to crack. Maybe the world wasn't just unprepared for me. Maybe it was actively hostile. My search continued through the rest of the summer. The initial surgical strikes devolved into a desperate carpet-bombing campaign. I was applying for anything with social, diversity, ethics, or community in the title. Junior assistant, coordinator, intern, unpaid, of course. Nothing. My savings, the money I'd gotten as graduation gifts, were dwindling. I was spending most of my days in my room, stewing in a potent mix of resentment and self-pity. My parents started to get worried. Their proud questions of any exciting news turned into concerned questions of any news at all. The breaking point came sometime in September. My dad sat me down in the living room. My mom hovered nervously in the doorway. He was holding a copy of the local newspaper's classified section, an actual physical newspaper. He said, "Elaine, honey, we are so proud of you and your degree, but it's been 4 months." He told me that maybe I needed to get some real-world experience, to get a foot in the door, any door. He pointed to an ad for a receptionist at a local dental office. A receptionist. I think I actually saw red. It was the ultimate betrayal. My own father, the man who had toasted my academic achievements, was telling me to go answer phones and schedule root canals. He didn't see it as a stepping stone. He saw it as my level. I screamed at him. I told him he didn't understand, that he was trying to crush my spirit and force me into a life of mundane servitude, just like everyone else. I accused him of secretly being disappointed in my choice of major all along. He just looked tired. He said he just wanted to see me happy and self-sufficient. I stormed up to my room and slammed the door, but his words stuck with me. Not because they were right, but because they signaled a new reality. The bank of Mom and Dad was closing. I was on my own. If I wanted to survive, I had to compromise. Temporarily, of course. I needed a job, any job, just to pay for my car insurance and phone bill while I continued my real job search. I refused to work in an office. That would be admitting defeat. It had to be something completely removed from my career path, something I could frame as a temporary, ironic detachment, an anthropological study. I saw a now hiring sign in the window of a chain coffee shop in a busy strip mall. The Grind, it was called. Perfect. I walked in and asked for an application. The manager was a woman about my age, with tired eyes and a tattoo of a coffee bean on her wrist. She didn't ask me about my 5-year plan or my thoughts on corporate hegemony. She asked if I could work weekends and if I was capable of lifting 30 pounds. I said yes. She hired me on the spot. My start date was the following Monday. I walked out of the coffee shop into the bright, indifferent afternoon sun. The smell of burnt coffee and cleaning solution clung to my clothes. I, Elaine, a scholar of gender theory, was about to become a barista. It was the most humiliating moment of my life. But I told myself it was strategic. It was a temporary step back to launch a greater leap forward. I was just gathering intel from behind enemy lines. That's what I told myself. My first day at the Grind was a masterclass in humiliation. I arrived wearing what I considered practical, minimalist attire. The manager, a perpetually stressed woman named Sarah, took one look at me and handed me a hideous brown apron and a branded visor. She told me the visor was non-negotiable. It was part of the uniform. I felt my intellectual identity being physically erased, replaced by a corporate logo. The training was a whirlwind of noise and unfamiliar terminology. Venti, grande, macchiato, frappuccino, double shot, extra whip. It was a language designed to obscure the simple reality of coffee and sugar. I, who could effortlessly discuss the semiotics of Foucault, could not figure out how to operate the cash register. The touchscreen was a bewildering array of options and modifiers. Every time I tried to ring up a simple black coffee, I somehow ended up with a triple-shot caramel latte with oat milk. Sarah had to void my transactions 3 times in the first hour. She wasn't mean about it, but her sighs were heavy with the weight of my incompetence. Then came the espresso machine. It was a gleaming chrome beast that hissed and roared like a dragon. My first attempt at steaming milk resulted in a screaming, boiling eruption that sent hot foam splattering across the counter. A teenage kid working next to me, who couldn't have been more than 17, calmly took the metal pitcher from my hand. He showed me the right angle to hold the steam wand, the gentle whirlpool motion to create the perfect microfoam. He didn't mock me. He was just helpful, which somehow made it worse. The customers were a relentless tide of demands, people on their way to important jobs, tapping their feet, checking their watches, sighing with impatience as I fumbled with their change. One man barked his order at me while on a loud business call, not even making eye contact. I found myself analyzing him through a critical lens. A perfect specimen of patriarchal entitlement, asserting his dominance in a service-oriented space. My analysis, however, did not help me make his ridiculously complex drink any faster. By the end of my 8-hour shift, my feet were throbbing. My back ached. My hair was stuck to my forehead under the cursed visor. and I was covered in a sticky film of coffee grounds and flavored syrup. I went home, took the longest shower of my life, and collapsed into bed. My grand anthropological study had a flaw. The anthropologist was also the subject, and the subject was miserable. The days bled into weeks. The autumn chill started to set in. My life fell into a grueling routine. Wake up before dawn, put on the uniform, and spend 8 hours performing a high-speed ballet of grinding, tamping, steaming, and pouring. I got better at the job. My hands learned the rhythms. I could pull a perfect espresso shot and steam milk in my sleep. I learned the names of the regulars. There was the construction crew that came in at 6 a.m. sharp for large black coffees. They were loud and joked around, but they always tipped well and said thank you. There was the group of yoga moms who would descend after their morning class, ordering impossibly complicated decaffeinated concoctions. There was the quiet old man who came in every afternoon to read the paper with a single small coffee, staying for hours. I still viewed them all through my academic framework. The construction workers were performing their masculinity. The yoga moms were trapped in the aesthetics of bourgeois consumerism. The old man was a lonely relic of a bygone era. My internal monologue was sharp and critical, a constant stream of high-minded analysis. But on the outside, I smiled. I said, "Have a nice day." I upsold them on pumpkin spice muffins. I was performing emotional labor on an industrial scale, and the dissonance was exhausting. One afternoon, Dylan stopped by. He was between job sites and wanted to grab a coffee. I saw him walk in, and my heart sank. I instinctively turned away, hoping he wouldn't see me. But he did. He walked right up to the counter, a broad smile on his face. He didn't seem to notice my ridiculous uniform or the smear of chocolate on my apron. He just said my name and asked how I was doing. I mumbled something about being fine. He ordered a simple black coffee. I made it for him, my hands shaking slightly. When I handed it to him, he tried to pay. I told him it was on the house. He insisted, pulling a $10 bill from his wallet and stuffing it into my tip jar. He told me to keep the change. Then he just stood there for a minute, leaning against the counter, and asked about my real job search. I gave him a vague, defensive answer about still looking for the right fit, about not wanting to compromise my principles. He just nodded. He didn't push. He didn't say, "I told you so." He told me his new truck was running great and that he was working on a challenging installation at a new hospital wing. He seemed genuinely engaged and satisfied by his work. Then he wished me a good rest of my shift and left. I watched him walk out to his shiny new pickup truck, get in, and drive away. For the rest of the day, I felt a hollow ache in my chest. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was something deeper. My first paycheck was a brutal reality check. After taxes, it was a pitifully small number. I sat at my kitchen table and did the math. I calculated how many hours I had to work to pay my car insurance, how many lattes I had to sell to afford my phone bill. My entire 4-year, multi-thousand-dollar education had led me to a point where my time was valued at a few cups of coffee per hour. The abstract value of my degree felt like a cruel joke in the face of the concrete reality of my financial situation. My social life had evaporated. My friends from my gender studies program were all in similar situations. Some had moved back home with their parents across the country. Others were in unpaid internships that sounded suspiciously like secretarial work. Our group chats, which used to be vibrant forums for dissecting theory and planning activism, had become grim support groups for the unemployed and underemployed. We complained about the system, about capitalism, about the patriarchy. But our complaints felt increasingly hollow, like echoes in an empty room. The incident that really broke something in me happened on a cold, rainy Saturday in November. The shop was slammed. The line was out the door. We were short-staffed. I was on the espresso machine, working as fast as I could, sweat dripping down my temples. I heard a familiar voice cut through the din. I looked up, and my blood ran cold. It was a girl from my senior seminar, one of the really smart, competitive ones. She was with a group of other people I vaguely recognized from campus. They were all dressed up, looking like they were on their way to some fun, professional person brunch. She saw me. Her eyes widened for a split second, a flicker of shock, before she composed her face into a mask of polite pity. She stepped up to the counter when it was her turn. She said my name, her voice a little too loud, a little too bright. She asked me how I was, what I was up to, as if the answer wasn't blindingly obvious. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. I just stared at her, my mind blank. I couldn't form a sentence. My manager, Sarah, seeing that I was frozen, gently pushed me aside and took the order. I could feel the whole group's eyes on me. I could feel their silent judgment, their relief that they weren't me. I retreated to the back room, claiming I needed to restock the milk. I leaned against the cold metal door of the walk-in fridge, my heart hammering against my ribs. The humiliation was a physical sensation, hot and sharp. In all my theorizing about systemic oppression, I had never truly understood the raw, personal sting of being looked down upon, of being seen as a failure. When I came back out, they were gone, but their presence lingered, a ghost of the life I was supposed to be living. Things started to shift after that, subtly. I began to see the world of the coffee shop not as a sociological experiment, but as my actual reality. I started paying more attention to my coworkers. The 17-year-old kid, I learned, was working to save up for a down payment on a used car so he could drive himself to community college next year. Sarah, the manager, was a single mom putting her daughter through daycare. This job, with its long hours and constant stress, was what kept a roof over their heads. Another barista was an aspiring musician, working 2 jobs to pay for studio time. Their struggles were not theoretical. They were about rent and food and tuition and daycare. They didn't have the luxury of deconstructing hegemony. They were too busy surviving it. They were also, for the most part, kind. They covered for each other. They shared tips. They complained about customers together in the back room. There was a simple, untheorized solidarity among us, born of shared experience. My social media presence withered. I stopped posting angry manifestos. What was the point? My eloquent critiques of late-stage capitalism seemed absurd when I was worried about my bank account being overdrawn. My pronouncements on toxic masculinity felt meaningless after a long day of serving coffee to men who were, for the most part, just regular tired guys trying to get through their day. They weren't all monsters. They weren't all oppressors. They were just people. The world, I was beginning to suspect, was infinitely more complicated and mundane than my textbooks had led me to believe. The final nail in the coffin of my old self came a few days before Christmas. The holiday rush was a special kind of hell. The shop was decked out in painfully cheerful decorations. The speakers blared incessant Christmas music. The day had been a nightmare from the start. One of the espresso machines was broken, and the line was perpetually a dozen people deep. Everyone was stressed and impatient. Around noon, a man in a business suit, infuriated by the long wait, started yelling at me. He accused me of being incompetent, of moving too slowly. He said he was going to be late for an important meeting. His face was red, and he was jabbing his finger at me over the counter. I just stood there, frozen, taking it. All my feminist theory, all my knowledge of power dynamics, provided me with zero defense. I couldn't tell him to check his privilege. I couldn't deconstruct his aggressive male posturing. I was a service worker. My job was to absorb his rage and offer him a free pastry. Sarah eventually came over and diffused the situation, her voice calm and practiced. After the man left, I fled to the back room and finally burst into tears. I cried from the humiliation, the frustration, the sheer grinding exhaustion of it all. I got through the rest of the shift in a fog. When I finally got home, I was a wreck. My eyes were puffy, my body ached, and my spirit felt like it had been scraped raw. I walked into the kitchen, and Dylan was there. He was sitting at the table, covered in dirt and what looked like grease. He looked even more exhausted than I felt. He was drinking a glass of water, staring into space. I must have looked as bad as I felt, because his expression immediately softened with concern. He asked me what was wrong. I just shook my head, unable to speak. The whole story felt too pathetic to tell. I started to cry again, silently this time, my shoulders shaking. He didn't press me. He just got up, filled the kettle with water, and put it on the stove. While it was heating, he quietly told me about his day. He'd been on an emergency call since the afternoon. An entire apartment building's heating had gone out. It was one of the coldest nights of the year. He and his team had been working for hours in a cramped, freezing boiler room to get it fixed. He said the pipes were old and the whole system was a mess. He finished his story just as the kettle began to whistle. He told me about the relief on people's faces when the heat finally kicked back on. An elderly woman had brought their whole crew hot chocolate. On the table, next to his keys and wallet, was a small stack of cash. He told me the landlord of the building had given him and his guys a huge cash bonus on the spot. He was so grateful. Dylan turned away and made me a cup of tea, just the way I like it. He put it on the table in front of me. He didn't lecture me. He didn't offer any advice. He didn't say a single word about my job or my life choices. He just sat back down, looking at me with simple fraternal kindness. I sat there, cradling the warm mug in my hands, the steam rising to meet my face. I looked at him, really looked at him, at his tired face, his dirty hands, the quiet competence in his posture. I looked at the cash on the table, tangible proof of a problem solved, of value created. He had spent his day in the freezing cold, wrestling with broken metal to bring warmth and comfort to hundreds of people. His work had a direct, immediate, and positive impact on the world. And in that moment, sitting in the quiet kitchen, the entire intellectual structure I had built my identity around collapsed into dust. All my theories, all my critiques, all my isms and ologies. They all felt like meaningless noise. They hadn't prepared me for any of this. They hadn't given me a single useful skill to navigate the real world. They hadn't helped me deal with an angry customer or earned me a livable wage. They hadn't provided me the comfort that this simple cup of tea was giving me right now. A single, devastatingly clear thought pierced through my exhaustion and self-pity. He fixes what is broken. What do I fix